All right.
Here we go.
You ready?
Yes.
Are you ready for transcendent takes on Black
Come
cultural
on, let's
history?
transcend.
No pressure. Such a lofty title. All right, I'm going to get the big question out of the way so we can have like a regular human being conversation. As an historian during this like current ways of the world,
It's delicately put, yes.
during a time when your work may be put into question,
Yeah.
how would you respond to that? How do you respond to that?
Oh, I mean, I think, first of all, thank you so much for being in conversation with me. Thank y'all for being in this room. I really appreciate your presence. So, in some ways, it highlights the present moment makes the stakes of the work even higher. It makes it even more important to do the work of storytelling, and history is one form of storytelling, right? When storytelling, and we tell stories as a way of interpreting our world, but also as a kind of ethical and moral guide, right? And so I think that we need that. I often talk about my work as the work of haunting the past, and so often experience kind of reverberations of sounds when I mention that, right? But haunting the past, that I try to walk around in the past in order to have a more ethical relationship than those in power did historically to people in the past. But now I'm in the past actually looking for spiritual resources and guidance from the ancestors.
And what's it looking like?
I mean, we're here. You know, they made it so that we're here.
Amen to that. All right, so you have this book, Black and Blues, which uses this really clever conceit of the color blue being woven into Black history as well as personal history. Where did that idea come from, and when did you realize, oh, this is a thing?
So I have not yet found a good answer to that question. I feel as though the book beckoned me. So there's a couple of ways that this has become clear to me. So the book begins in my grandmother's bedroom, which was in my first home. I came home from the hospital to my grandmother's home. Her bedroom was blue, and she had chosen what had been the dining room as her bedroom. So her bedroom was in the middle of the house, a kind of double shotgun. The two sides had been put together, and the walls were blue, the ceiling was blue, the covers were blue, the prayers that were tucked inside of the vanity were blue, and there was a picture of bluebirds, and I have a rendition of it on my first tattoo I got at age 50 on my butt. And so I came into the world through the color blue. Blue was a portal for me. And the night before my first book event, that home burned down. And so I've been saying I feel like I'm not an unhoused person, but I feel homeless. But the home exists inside the book now. And so I really do feel I was beckoned to it. It didn't come to me as a device, right? It came to me as a kind of, like I'm almost an aha. And then I just kept following down the pathways. And at first it was going to be a series of essays. And I said, no, this has to be a story. And so maybe that was the part that I was like, how do I weave this together? Like turn it into like a quilt-like story.
Oh, I love the idea of it as a quilt. Wait, okay, so when you're saying that because I've heard you say haunt, you're trying to haunt the past. What are you searching for? What are you excavating?
I am looking for, it's a good question. I mean, ultimately, I'm trying to get us closer to being in right relation to the beloved community as an ideal, to a kind of ethical practice, right? So all the politics I have, trying to turn them into sort of a set of ethical practices. So I'm looking for people who were vulnerable. I'm looking for ancestors who were vulnerable, who had, from the position of vulnerability, an insight into the human condition that can guide us. Right? And in order to do that, I also have to look in the past in different ways that we conventionally recount the past, because we tend to tell the stories through imperial lenses.
Yeah.
Right, and so I want to look to those who are sort of underneath, sort of like, this is not a perfect example because it's a fictional figure, but Pilot Dead in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon is my hero, right? And this woman who, doesn't have a belly button, which freaks people out, and she has a, and has a snuff box earring, and it's just, and she's the most sort of marginal on the outside figure in that, and she's the moral center of the novel. And so I'm trying to sort of figure that out
Yeah.
in the past, who that is.
Okay.
Go to those people frequently.
Okay, this is great because what I love about your work is I think we have this noble notion of like mythologizing those who came before us, and you are able to kind of demystify the ancestors. How are you able to do that? You do it so beautifully in this book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll give a concrete example of how I try to do it. So George Washington Carver, right, who everybody knows, George Washington Carver made the peanut great, right? He's a Black History Month figure, right? And in a very truncated way, he's a Black History Month figure. So I go into his life, right, in some greater detail. And what I find is, on the one hand, George Washington Carver was a queer man. People forget that detail of his life. And he was sort of a holy man, right? He acted, and when he got to Alabama, people thought he was like a, kind of a root worker, because he was always wandering around in the forest and talking to God, right? And so that could be a demystification of him, right? Which was important, right? To try to tell his, he's a beautiful visual artist. It's another story that you don't get. But then I wanted to say, okay, but we know his name. So what was his relationship to the place? So then what does it mean for him to show up in rural Alabama and then see that poor people have painted their homes beautifully. They have done all this beautification. They have these sources of knowledge that are local. And that actually becomes inspiration for his work as a scientist. And so the demystification is also putting people in relation to other people, not just, so it's like telling the fuller story of the ones we know, and then trying to put them in relation to those whose names we don't know in ways that open up a sense of community and open up a sense of possibility in terms of accessing the past, even in ways. So we may not know the name of the person who he saw who inspired him to start to make paint colors, because he saw all these folks making their shacks beautiful. But I can recount it, right, through his memory, that there were people who made it say, oh wow, there's a tenderness for this place, notwithstanding the cruelty of this place.
Yeah. I will say my family has now heard all of the George Washington Carver lore, as I was like, no, you don't understand. Like he made paints from all these, like the ground around him. He's like made this beautiful textures. But we also another example that I love is the way that you see potentially the Middle Passage. Yeah. And the way that you see, like the way that we could possibly see like the sky and the water.
Yeah, because, sorry, did I?
No, please.
No, I mean, we know, harrowing journey, right? People chained together and living in close proximity in muck and feces and all kinds of emeses, with death around, right? And also, it's sort of like how poet Robert Hayden talked about it, a journey through death to new life on these shores. And so many writers have recounted this passage in such profound ways. And I kept thinking about, well, what does it mean, though, that they saw these blues, when they were brought up on the deck to be exercised and often taunted. They saw the blue sky and the blue water. And to think about what meaning that must have had, right? So that for some who jumped over the edge, right, thinking that a journey back through the blue might bring them back home to Africa, West Africa in most instances. But also, what does it mean that the color, even after that horrifying journey, the colors still had meaning for so many people? Same thing with indigo plantations, right? Indigo plantations are terrible. And Black people in South Carolina still wanted to cultivate indigo and color things indigo and make blue porches and do all. And it's not, and so that's sort of about blue, but it's also about a sense of beauty that was greater, and it's sort of at the core of what it means to be human, that was greater than the violence and the degradation, which to me is I don't know how you get a better example of the triumph of the human spirit, right? To have that experience and to continue to have a sense of beauty and a sense of creative possibility I think is a lesson for all of humanity. And there are lots of examples around the world of people who provide those kinds of lessons, and so for me it was the Middle Passage was one of the entry points of thinking about that, right?
Right. And when you're when you're writing this book and you have these essentially, I guess, blue tinted glasses on while writing, what does the world look like to you? What does America look like to you?
Ooh. Well, so blue, one of the things I keep saying is, in the book, and I'm on it, is blue is contrapuntal.
Ooh.
It's beautiful and it's painful. It's hot and cold. It is, the contradiction of Black Lives Matter with Blue Lives Matter. It's, it's a source of suffering and a source of beauty. And so, and this is why the blues are called the blues, right? Because, as Albert Murray said, you play the blues to get over the blues, right? And so what it looks like for me is actually to be at a very intimate level, is the recognition, and this is something, my grandmother, everybody tells you this, and it's sort of like part of growing up to fully reckon with it. There's no life without suffering. Whoa. And it's sitting in that, and there's a particular register that I'm talking about through Black experience, but to sit with that and to still sort of believe in life, right, itself, right? So for me, the blue tinted glasses are kind of like a reckoning with what my grandmother used to always say, which her auntie used to say to her, you weren't born to live on flower beds of ease. You weren't, you were made for tough stuff, right? And so that is what it looks like it's like that's how it felt to me, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you talked about the contradiction, because I wanted to talk to you about that.
Okay.
Because you're able to sit comfortably in it. You'll in South to America, when you're able to juxtapose the grandeur of the Kentucky Derby with the cruelty of the killing of Breonna Taylor, both in Louisville, or the way the Union, or in this book with the Union soldiers' uniforms, with compared to the blue uniforms and the enslaved in those uniforms compared to now the idea of Blue Lives Matters. Yeah. One pivot to that contradiction, when you talk about the genre of the music of the blues, and you use this quote by James Baldwin that's basically all this angst that they're letting out, I'm paraphrasing terribly, creates some kind of joy.
Yes.
And you juxtapose that with, I think there was a blues musician who didn't want his work to be recorded because he was this is going to be commodified somehow. Yeah. Uh-huh. And this led me to this question of, essentially, because of that contradiction, who gets access to that angst and who gets access to that joy?
So that's a good question. I think it depends on what kind of access you mean, right? So, because there is, okay, I'm going to try to stay with this book and not what I'm trying to work on now.
We can talk about that afterwards. All right.
There is a way that there is this experience in particular of Black life that gets commodified and consumed, right, as a kind of source of pleasure, entertainment that's in some ways wholly dissociated from the living, right? And that is troubling, of course, and for all the reasons that exploitation and inequality are troubling. But there is something about an invitation, though, that is that has always existed, a part of Black life on these shores, that is really about a kind of, it's a moral challenge, it's an ethical challenge, right? To say, I'm going to invite, when you sing your song in public, right, and you're testifying to your experience, there's an invitation there to be in something closer to right relation, right? Mm-hmm. And to be completely honest about this moment, some of this backlash is actually a backlash to the potency of Black art over the past decade and the way that it has begun to deeply move people across all boundaries of identity. And this idea that if that is successful, right, the whole thing could change, right? So it's like, so don't read their books, right? Don't listen. And so I'm good with the invitation, even as I can be critical at times of the kind of consumption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one thing I'm trying to figure out, like if you accept it at the minimum, you will be commodified, then how are you able to, I guess, go forward authentically?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I think that's our tradition. Literally, our tradition is people who were commodified, commodities, right? And especially, and to be, get a little heady, in neoliberal capitalism, everything is a commodity, right? Everything is marketized, every aspect of our being. There's no way to avoid it. And so you try to hold on to something that's not reducible to that, but also you try to make meaning in the midst of that reality. Like if you make a living in this society, you are somehow implicated in some funky stuff. You are.
You're not wrong.
We don't get away from it. So then the question is, okay, well, can we then sort of try to be in relation to each other and to ourselves in a way that you said, that's truer, that's more decent. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I try to grapple with, I guess, because I host a show about race and identity, and there is can be this trap of trying to reaffirm my humanity to others. I'm like, this is my experience as a Black woman. This is why I should exist. And you're like, oh no, don't do that. And then I got to a segment of Black and Blues where you tell the story of this man called Brother Blues. Oh, yeah. And I would love for you to basically tell us how did Brother Blues inform how you tell your story?
Yeah. Okay. So Brother Blue was this storyteller. When we moved up, so I was born in Alabama. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We came there for my mother to go to graduate school. When we moved there, when I was a little girl, there was this man named Brother Blue, and he was a storyteller. He wore all blue. He used to call his clothes his rags. He would wear a tan and like a blue jean suit, and he'd have like butterflies and streamers come from his clothing, and he would sit in Harvard Square and tell stories. And it was there was something about him that was familiar. I mean, he was different, but he was familiar, and there was something that resonated. And he was just a fixture, and he would tell this beautiful story. He did like a jazz version of King Lear, but he would also tell this beautiful story about the caterpillar that didn't know he was a butterfly until the moment of emergence, right? And so a friend of mine said to me when I was an adult, like, I want you to go find the picture of Brother Blue in the Harvard yearbook. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it turned out he had this remarkable story. You have to read the book, because there's pieces of this story really that are just extraordinary. Growing up in the Depression, and his father had an attempted suicide because he couldn't feed his family, and he winds up fighting in World War II, and then he goes to Harvard College, and in the picture he looks like Du Bois or somebody in the yearbook, like he's very buttoned up, and looks exactly the opposite from how I knew him to be. And he had this sort of trajectory that looked like he was going to be the sort of ideal, upstanding, bow tie, respectable Negro in the mid-20th century way. And he decided his calling was to tell stories instead on the street. And that was what he did. And when he died, like all of the luminaries who talked about how profound the impact, and it just was something, I wanted to tell his story, but both because to me, he was a model of a storyteller who was guided by his passion and not by ambition. but also because he had this gorgeous love story with his wife, Ruth, who worked at Harvard and founded the Black Women's Oral History Project at Harvard. And so there was just this beautiful, she's where Ruth Hill is worthy of applause. And we invoke her spirit in the room. And they just had this beautiful companionship that also was about, the storyteller and the keeper of the stories, and that both are necessary. And that felt important to me too.
Yeah. I'm gonna put a lot of praise on you right now. Take it. I feel like whenever I read one of your books, I come out of it feeling like I have like some kind of cheat code for how to like navigate the world somehow. Because I remember reading South to America in 2022. And it was around the same time for me when President Biden had his fight, like the soul of America speech. And inadvertently, those things became in conversation with each other. And do you find that with this book, do you find it also being in conversation with what's happening around us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, to me, that's partially because we often talk about books as these kind of solitary creations, but they are products of the time in which they emerge. So I feel like, I'm writing the book, I'm inspired by visual artists, but there's so many visual artists who are using blue and all of the blue, and we live with the blue note, right? Blues is the center of the American music tradition, right? And it has all of and so we're returning to it. I think many of us are returning to it because we're trying to grapple with tragedy and crisis and finding meaning through it all, right? So I think it is in conversation. It's not surprising to me that it's in conversation with lots of other work. And I'm a reader before I'm a writer. I'm a voracious reader, and so it's also, I feel like I wind up experiencing the moment too. Yeah. That shapes my work, even if it's not like literally, but it's.
I mean, in my mind, you're like that meme of the guy who's at the giant bulletin board reading all the yarn together to get all these connections together. But is there any thread that you pulled while doing this that like really surprised you?
Oh, first of all, I like that image because I do use big poster board and big,
really?
and I do a lot of mapping, like Alice in the Known World, Edward P. Jones novel, who's she who remakes maps, like that sort of, it's part, Alice Pilot. I have a bunch of these women who are my, my seers. A thread that surprised me, well, I liked finding out about the lore about blue jays.
Yeah.
And that the lore about blue jays is that you couldn't find them on Fridays because that's when they went down to report to the devil on how evil white folks were being to black folks.
All right.
And why I liked it is because in the context, there's all these, in that context, it became clear that in a very sort of precise and cogent fashion, that the folks who shared that lore, who were coming out of enslavement and Jim Crow, understood on a profound level that the injustice was unjust. And that seems like sort of obvious, but sometimes people don't talk about the ancestors in that way. And though, in terms of having a set of values, an analysis of the world. And so it was like a folk tale, but it really was a folk tale that revealed an analysis of the world. This is so then there's other bird stuff, and some bird stuff didn't show up in the book, but there's really, I love.
I'm loving this rabbit hole. I'm so
sorry. So scrub jays, they're blue, but they're not blue jays. So I couldn't put it in the book, but they hold funerals.
Yeah.
And they're incredible. They're ceremonial and they're elegant, and it gives this connection to all of it is to say it's a connection to the natural world and an interpretation of the natural world that comes out of the folk tradition that is both precise in its attentiveness to the natural world, in the way that conjure is, right? It's a conjure and hoodoo, it's medicine as well as faith-based belief. And also, so on the one hand, it's like an attentiveness to the natural world, and the other hand, it's an interpretation of the natural world that suggests a set of commitments and values. And so that thread, I didn't know was going to wind up being so, not just in the book, but captivating for me.
Wait, so when you're creating this book and you use this conceit, well, then what were the rules that you set for yourself while writing? Like what was a yay and what was a nay?
Rules. Okay, so there's this essay that Albert Murray wrote about the artist Romare Bearden called Bearden Plays Bearden. And Romare Bearden is one of the greatest African-American artists. I did not know until recently that Albert Murray, who's a writer and an inspiration, I call him my tar baby because I can't get unstuck from him, even though there's lots of stuff that he said that I don't agree with, but he just is so impactful to me from Mobile. And he says this thing about, so he named all of Bearden's paintings, but they were very close. And he said this thing about Bearden's work. He said, you look at Bearden's paintings and you can see, in his collages, and you can see the history of art history and like who his influences are. That's one way of reading him. But another way of reading him is through the rhythm. Like he's trying to capture the sounds of jazz in the visual composition, and you might not see it. So he talks about trying to do both. And so these are the rules, right? The rules for me are, there's a narrative, but the rhythm matters, right? The engagement with the visual and the sonic, the variation of the length of a sentence or a chapter that's going to work as part of the whole. So this is why I love that meme reference you made, because there's all these putting pieces together, taking things out that can, I got to kill my darlings. Even though I have a critique of Ernest Hemingway, it's not the secret, but it was a good sentence. So those are the rules. I'm trying to do something that's like our music tradition.
It's a lot of pressure, man.
Yeah, well, but it's a joy too, right? It's like the joy of creation. It's art. We try to make it art.
Yeah, and what I also particularly love about this book, it always reminds me of the conversation like the Sankofa. You gotta look back in order to look forward. Even the cover, I think it's was it Seeing Through Time?
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Titus Kaphar. He's an amazing artist.
Are you thinking very intentionally about that while you're weaving all this together? Like, how is this in conversation with the present or the future?
Oh, no one has asked me that about the future, actually, and I don't know if I want to write things that endure. I want it to be something that is of use, that people can carry with them. There's Ursula Le Guin has this essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, which I love, and I think it applies to nonfiction too, which is, there's one way you can tell one type of writing that is hero focused, and another which is more deeply connected to the tradition of women, which is about sort of what do you carry with you, what do you carry along with you, and I guess I want to write in a way that something becomes part of the bag that people are carrying with them as they move forward, and it lasts longer than me.
I mean, I'm not going to think of yourself as an ancestor one day, but yeah.
I'm trying to earn my place as a good ancestor.
Wait, did this book? Oh yeah, Clara.
Thank you.
Did this book change or shift your relationship with your ancestors?
Oh, I don't. That's. Well, I don't know if the book did, but the transition to writing that was not as much conventionally academic and to writing that felt much more deep, still using the research and the resources of the scholarly, but that was as much about art as it was about trying to produce knowledge, right? To try that that transition has absolutely deepened my sense of a relationship to the ancestors in terms of, and because I think, there's a way in which I was trying to sort of think about the divine the other day, and I wrote in my journal, God is stories. And there is something about the story, the inheritance of the story that is about what it means to connect with the divine, and so that feels very ancestral. And I think of ancestors both in terms of genealogically, but also generally, like some of our ancestors we choose, as people who are, people who are pouring into us, yeah.
All right, so now, what are you working on now?
I was about to tell y'all, and then I was like, it's gonna be an announcement, so maybe I'm not supposed to. But I'll tell you one thing, but it's not a question. So I'm working on a middle grade book geared towards like 6th, 7th grade, that is about what it meant to attend segregated schools and to seek education. And so it starts with the story of a 10-year-old boy, it's nonfiction, it starts with the story of a 10-year-old boy in Tennessee who encounters Union soldiers, he's enslaved, who say, come with us and you'll be free. And he travels and he's working hard, but he also develops this thirst for knowledge. And one day they're situated after this huge battle, and he's on the battlefield bringing water and everything. And they happen to be so the regiment he's with is white soldiers, but he happens to encounter these black soldiers. And one of them says, come into our tent. And he goes into the tent and he sees all these black men reading. And it's like something, this is the context in which literacy could be punishable by maiming or death, right? And so for this little boy to see all these black men reading it's through the Blueback Speller is what they're reading, and that shows up in this book. And that experience leads him to pursue literacy. And so it goes from Civil War through the 1950s and tells all these stories of acquiring knowledge through education and these incredible schools that were built by black people against the odds, and wanting to give young people a sense of that history. Because when you hear the history of Raleigh Board of Education, none of that tradition of the passionate pursuit of education and the building of beautiful schools comes through. So I want to tell that story, but I also want kids today who are in under-resourced schools to have a sense of possibility that comes from that past.
Do you find it difficult to make that story like accessible within that age range, or are you finding it all right?
Well, we'll see, right?
We'll see.
The proof is in the pudding. There's so much. One of the things that I love about being an archive junkie is there's so much detail and color and excitement often in archives. So it's easy to, you can talk about what the desks looked like and what the field was, and, the building of the auditorium, and, this teacher, and if there's photographs, you can describe. So there's a lot of descriptive content that I think is available. And nobody understands fairness and unfairness better than children. So they already have the language, right? And so I think it isn't feeling so hard thus far, but we'll see what my editor says.
Wait, this now makes me go back to a question about this book. Because it's so much archival, such a silly question, but what does that take? How long,
Obsession?
I love it.
I mean, that's what it takes. You have to love a rabbit hole. No, it's because you're digging through thousands of pieces of paper and you don't know, you can spend weeks on a rabbit hole that leads nowhere. And so you kind of have to enjoy the journey. Yeah, it's an obsessiveness thing. It's a nosiness. It's a big part of it.
Historians are notably the nosiest of all.
They are. And I will say, I love that people call me a historian now.
What would you like to be called?
I don't know. I'm a storyteller.
All right.
But historians have a kind of
and I've written a book that was history, formally speaking. Like May We Forever Stand was a work about the Black National Anthem. That was a work of history, formally speaking. I am sort of undisciplined relative to most historians, right? Like methodologically, because I'm going to treat a story about a haint as just as legitimate as a census document, which is why I'm not, not. I sort of am like on the edge of the historian thing. Yeah.
You're on the outskirts of
I'm
history?
a little bit on the outskirts, yeah.
So when do you, so when you're pulling from the historical, how do you decide when to weave a personal narrative, like your own personal narrative in it?
Oh, it's a great question. When I think that the personal is going to resonate with the reader in a meaningful way, it's sort of a trick that I've learned in part from Henry Louis Gates, who was my dissertation advisor and is now my colleague. And I noticed that he often will have a deep mastery of a field, but when he does a documentary, he'll walk with people and be like, oh, that's fascinating, like he doesn't know it. I'd be like, he knows that, why is he acting like he doesn't know it? But that it's a way of bringing people in. He lets us discover with him. And I remember noticing that like 20 years ago, and thinking about how will I do that? Because I think it's a good technique, and I enjoy it as a reader and a viewer. And so sometimes it's that, and so that's one occasion. Mm-hmm. And another kind of occasion is when I know that there are going to be readers who are not into this, right? At this piece of what I'm writing, and there's something about the vulnerability of intimacy where people can say, okay, well, I don't really like this thing that she's doing, but I trust her, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I would just want to earn the trust of my readers. So in those moments, if I can be vulnerable, it allows, I think this is right based upon the reactions of some readers who don't really like what I write, but they're like, but it's a good story. I don't really like that part, right? But I think that, and I think that's part, it's the honey, right? It's the honey as opposed to the vinegar, of trying to bring people in. And so sometimes I tell my story because I want people to see where it's coming from, so that they'll keep traveling.
That is a level of humility that I have never heard a writer say before. Like, some people don't want to read my book, and I'm like, thank you so much. Here's the book.
No, I mean, not everything is for everybody. That's all right.
Okay, this is yesterday. Was yesterday your birthday?
It was. Thank you.
And, all right, happy birthday. Keeping on theme, as a Virgo, your gemstone, blue sapphire. Sapphire.
Yes.
All right.
It's all over the place.
It's everywhere.
Wait, can I tell you another?
Please, say whatever you want.
So, okay, so when I was on tour, my Atlanta stop, I saw some family friends who were in their mid-80s to approaching 90. I hadn't seen since I was a child, right? So I'd go to their house, and it's really this beautiful reunion. The husband, who was a physician, is telling a story about how when I was born, I had jaundice. And my dad was flipping out, and he was calling in the middle of the night like, Imani has jaundice, and they're not going to treat her right because they're racist in that hospital, and da-da-da, right? And so he's like, gets up in the middle of the night. He doesn't work in anything related to, he's an immunologist, like nothing related to babies. But the treatment in 1972 for jaundice babies was to put them under a blue light.
Oh.
And so, like, it just kept, so blues show up all over the place.
It's always popping out. Okay, this is, because I was telling you I'm learning how to play the banjo, and all I know how to play is lift every voice and
Isn't
sing.
that amazing?
Yeah.
It's
But,
amazing.
but learning it, well, don't clap for that.
Yes.
But,
It's amazing. Talk about tending to the ancestors. That's the tradition. That's a beautiful thing.
but learning how to play while reading your book, and you talk about the blue note. As this it's like a B flat, and it's like it's all the
Buried note.
And I realized all I know how to play is lift every voice and sing, which has a B flat. And I was like, oh no. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
But let's see that. But that's also really so for them to write a song that was a march that was anthemic, right? And this is Rosamond Johnson, James Weldon Johnson, Rosamond Johnson. Rosamond does the music, but to include a blue note is a very deliberate. Lift Up Your Voice and Sing was being called the Black national anthem before the United States had a national anthem. Right? It wasn't because they declared it the national anthem. It was because Black communities heard this song and said, "This is our national song," and so it spread from church to church and school to school. So that is right. To understand that had to have a blue note is a really powerful thing.
Gosh, all right. So
It's 125 years old this year too.
it is 125 years old this year. All right, so with looking back on your year,
You're so wonderful. I take all these side trips, and you're just like, let me get Rainer back in. Yeah.
looking at the timekeeper, and I'm like, I gotta get it ready. Looking at your years, since your birthday was yesterday, how can you reflect and see how? What are your hopes and expectations for the future going forward?
So, I just hope my people are okay. I lost 2 cousins while I was writing this book, and both of them, in different ways, their hearts gave out. And it just is so emblematic of the way this place can break your heart over and over and over again. And yet they were both so beautiful, and and that's the tradition. It's like they were funny and creative and curious, and so you just try to be love up on our folks and try to not just survive, but to continue to create, or to be fully human, which is what the creative impulse is, right? So that's all I got.
That's the goal. All right, I wanted to have, because there are a lot of people here, and I know that they wanted to talk to you. So I wanted to make time for, if you have any questions for Imani Perry. There's a microphone here and a microphone here. If you got something. All right, sir in the hat.
What's that?
Does the microphone work? Is it on? Oh yeah. Then
Greetings. Okay, it works.
all right.
First of all, I want to thank you. You're an angel because I think you went to Harvard, and that's a blessing. For me, you're 7 7s, and blue is my favorite color. I want to ask you, because my name is Michael A. Lee, like Robert E. Lee. This is my hometown, been here for 30 years, and this is a very, very serious question. On behalf of Congressman Norton's office, Mayor Muriel Bowser's office, the President's office of Howard University, UDC, Congressional Black Caucus, 100 HBCUs, the NAACP, Barack and Michelle Obama, National Bar Association, Eric H. Holder, the National Medical Association, and then the National Newspaper Association, and number 4, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. My question to you, because you sit with the best at Harvard, like Barack Obama. My question, 2 questions. Have we lost our way? And then, is the word black hurting us? Those are my 2 questions for someone. I'm the lower class of DC, been here for 30 years. My family first came here in 1910. My dad's from Virginia, my mom's. But my question to the African American people, have we lost our way? And is the word black, is this hurting us? What is your view on this?
No, I think white supremacy is hurting us. Not the word because, and I don't. So, I'm not gonna project this on you, but I do think that as black folks, we often have. It's so inconceivable, the kind of arbitrariness of the cruelty and injustice, is that we think it must be something we're doing, right? There must be something that we can change, and
and so I think as a result, and I think there's a beautiful tradition of sort of being critical and trying to cultivate, cultivate character and community and the like. And so, but I tend to not say that we've lost our way. We have a very complex set of challenges that come out of Jim Crow, that come out of legacies of colonialism, that come out of the exploitation of this newest form of capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, where everything is a market, right? And so it's just a really, really challenging landscape, not the least of which is because at any moment, people in positions of power can exploit racism in order to make large numbers of Americans who are not Black, right, turn away from their own experiences of vulnerability where they might, if they had attended to them, they might understand their solidarities with us, right? And so we are in a, it's just, and I will also say, I try to think about it. I would by no means say that I am the best thinker on this topic, but I also don't think that the best are always at the most elite institutions in terms of understanding the world at all. When I won the Inside Literary Prize, which was the first, it was a prize judged by, the only prize in this country judged by people who are incarcerated, one of the things I said in my acceptance speech is, so much of the way that I understand the world has come from incarcerated people. Because you don't see it more clearly than in the prisons, what the whole thing is, so.
Well, thank you very much. For me, you're an angel, but then I'm God, Lord Jesus Christ centered. And the truth of it is, we are not Black and they're not white. Is this wrong?
Brother, can we let somebody else ask a question? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi. I work at a small bookstore in Norfolk. We carry your book, and another book that we carry that I put in conversation with yours is The Black Church by Henry Louis Gates. And he touches on how the blues has such an impact in gospel music. And I was just wondering what I think were the most impactful things about like how the blues touches on all of Black music when you were doing your research for the book.
Yeah, so in that book he talks about Tommy Dorsey specifically and his conversion experience after the death of his wife and child and turning from secular music to gospel, and so bringing so many of the techniques of his secular music. I mean, it really is, you can tell a history, and I'm not unique in talking about this history, right, of the relationship between the way the blues changes and shapes gospel, but also the relationship of the blues to jazz, to Foundation for Soul, R&B, even hip hop, right? So I think that's there. What I'm interested in, and one of the things that that Baldwin talks about is there's the formal piece of the music, and then there is the kind of spiritual component of it, and that, at least in this book for me, was the most important piece, was to capture a sense of what does the blues do for the spirit, to provide a kind of sustenance and also a means of telling a people's story. It's where I found where I wanted to sit with it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. First off, I just want to say Henry Louis Gates is like my personal hero.
I'll tell him you said that next week.
I mean, it genuinely inspired me inspired my love of history, inspired my love of most social studies. I mean, it's amazing. I wanted to ask, you talk so much about this vulnerability from this very wide lens and in trying to understand ancestors and everything. How do you personally access your vulnerability, and how does that affect your writing?
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful question. I mean, I don't know. It's all over the place. I don't even have. I cry all over the place, and I'm an intensely emotionally aware person, and for me, that is a creative resource, as I think it is for many creative people. the reason why I make the point about the distinction from academic writing is so much of academic training is actually to distance you. It's just kind of like, particularly for those of us who are trained to be scholars, it's sort of, you're trained to be this imperial scholar who has this kind of detachment and distance. And that has to be undone to allow the research to coexist with doing something that is artful. And so it's a choice to put that vulnerability on the page, and to also be okay with, there's when you put your heart and soul on a page and people tear it apart, I mean, it's a devastating thing. But you have to be willing to do it. I think if you want to make good art, right? And so it's a kind of, maybe the answer to your question is to be okay with the fact that there are people who will not feel what you're doing, but also to have a kind of courage with creativity. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
For the question.
Hi, Imani.
Hi.
So I want to flip the script a little bit. I want to maybe pick your brains in terms of your writing methodology. So I do podcasting and I'm a writer, editor. And thus far, I've only contributed to an anthology about 4 years ago. I've been wanting to write my own book for the last 5-10 years. And this year I decided I was going to publish 2 books, and I've just submitted the first manuscript to my editor.
Wonderful.
The question-
Congratulations.
The question I wanted to ask you was, it took me forever to get to that point where I could hand it over to the editor. I agonized over the content. It's nonfiction, it's a memoir. Roughly, very, very briefly about life sayings that I grew up with as a child that have informed me as a young girl growing up and transitioning into womanhood. And I went back and forth and back and forth. I missed my deadline by about 4 weeks, but my publisher and editor have been amazingly gracious and patient. How do you know when you get to the end of the road in terms of your writing? Does that creativity just keeping on? Do you know when you've reached that point where it's okay to put that full stop, hand it over, and you're good?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think it varies. It depends on each writer. But for me, it's when I start saying the same thing over and over again. So there was a moment in when I was writing Breathe, when my editor, Gayatri, said, okay, Imani, you've told this story about, I was telling this story about a map of Africa in my second grade classroom, and they had Rhodesia, and I told my teacher this should be Zimbabwe, and she put a piece of paper over it. And she said, you've told the story 3 times now. and that always happens when I'm coming to the end. I wind up circling because it's the shape has taken place, and so I'm actually ruminating and I'm not writing anymore. And that's when I start doing that is when I need to step back and actually start to do the line editing part as opposed to the crafting of the bigger narrative. But I think it varies for people. I think the thing for me that I will say that I have learned is that it's not, I never want my work to be the final word on anything. It is an invitation to a relationship with other readers and writers. And so for me, that makes it possible to release it because if I don't, it's not going to be part of the conversation, right? It's not going to be a resource for people. And so it's never perfect. Anything that is worth writing about, it's worth having more than one person write about it. And I think for those type of lessons, I think allow me to let go, which I think is an essential tool for writers.
Right. I think, just to conclude, it really does depend, very quickly, it really does depend on the subject matter. And in my case, I was talking about some personal stuff I'd been through, which was quite graphic in some areas.
Yeah.
My peer review group came back and said, a little bit too much detail, Simone, not sure whether you should share this much. So I had to do that kind of back and forth, pare it down, make sure that it was right. I wasn't shortchanging my readers, as it were.
And that also
That was the challenge.
But then that also points to also the complexity of, books have lots of people who are part of bringing them into the world, and it's a beautiful thing, but it's also a complex thing, right? Because making and sometimes it winds up being a fractious thing.
And that's also part, it's like every other workplace. it's part of that too. And knowing how to work with people and also feel like you have fidelity to your vision, I think is a part of the process. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right. Last question.
Hi. As a Black woman writer, especially at the beginning of your career, what resistance have you met or do you still meet for the production of like what are extremely Black pieces of literature?
It's hard.
And how do you push through the resistance?
Yeah. So, it's in the way that everything you in a society that is deeply sexist and racist and unjust in many ways and deeply competitive, that there's always resistance, but to me it's sort of, it feels like it's part of the larger struggle, like I don't feel like I'm special in confronting it's sort of like everybody has, problems on their job, right? Of some form or another that has to do with all kinds, there's interpersonal challenges too. So yeah, lots of forms of resistance. People, the moments where people question the rigor of the work, people say, well, you should stop writing so much, you should cite this person instead of that person that was with academic work, or why are you doing this, or you should stop trying. I'll give you an example. I was a finalist for, and this wasn't that long ago, but like a couple books ago, and I was a finalist for this fellowship, not a big one, so it's not one of the ones, I'm not talking bad about one of these big and and they got this this evaluation back, and the things that they said about me, I was like, why would this, they gave me a fellowship, I could not believe it, right? Because they were like, you should just stop trying to write artfully. You should stop trying to do this, you should stop trying to do that, this isn't good, that, and it was just evisceration. And it was a kind of response, it was like, the only way someone could have said this is if they wanted me to actually stop writing. And so what I have learned to do, one is to read that and not take that on as evidence, but I've also learned to learn from criticism even when it's unjust. And that is a hard lesson to learn, but when you do it, it makes like, yeah, this is not a fair judgment, but maybe they saw, maybe this is actually a little bit useful, because people, when they nitpick, they are trying to look at you to tell you what's wrong. And I think, to not take it, to understand that it doesn't mean that I'm not good because and that, it just is time. It's time, it's lessons, it's belief in yourself. It's my grandmother, telling me to understand my own value and worth, regardless, and the skepticism she told me about the world. So, the last thing I'll say is you have to talk to other people who are because we get the moment where we're most vulnerable is often where we make ourselves most lonely. And it's like to talk to other folks about this thing that broke your heart. I just think is essential for moving through it. That's such a good question, though. Thank you so much.
Thank you.